In today's video, you're going to learn everything you need to know regarding truthy and falsy values in JavaScript. We are first going to talk about what does it even mean if a value is truthy or falsy. Then we're going to talk about how do you know whether a value is truthy or falsy. And then we're going to get into some examples where you'll actually see these truthy and falsy values come up, and you might realize the importance of knowing when a value is either truthy or falsy. So first things first, what does it mean when a value is truthy or falsy? Well, a value is falsy if it evaluates to false when coerced to a Boolean. So a Boolean value is a true-false value, and a falsy value is when you coerce some value or you convert some value's types and it evaluates to false. So an example of this when something is coerced to a Boolean is if you write an if condition. So if this condition, then do some code. Well, in that condition, if you have a certain value in that condition, it's automatically going to be converted to a Boolean to decide whether you should go into that if block and into that block of code. But I'll show you some examples of this here in a little bit. And then a value is truthy if it evaluates to true when in a Boolean context or when coerced to a Boolean. So within JavaScript, how do you know if a value is truthy or falsy? Well, I think the best thing for you to do is to remember what values are falsy, and you don't necessarily even need to remember it. Just you can definitely look it up. A quick Google search will yield you the falsy values in JavaScript, and then either after memorizing the falsy values or looking up if a value is falsy or not, then you know all other values are truthy. So if you know all the values that are falsy, you know all other values within your program are going to be truthy. So the falsy values in JavaScript, that is going to be the value of 0, -0. Yes, JavaScript does have -0. And one potential use case of this is like if you were programming a video game and you had a player running in the reverse direction and then they stop, well, you could technically say that their speed is 0 at that point because they stopped, but that negative might tell you that they were heading in a reverse direction at the point in which they stopped. So there's potential use cases for -0, and there's probably other use cases that I'm not considering right now. But the falsy values are 0, -0, an empty string, null, nan, so not a number, false, and undefined. So I mean, I feel like all those, there's not really corner cases there. All those, seemingly make quite a bit of sense. However, there are some values that you might think are falsy, but are actually truthy. And the 4 I've listed here are kind of the most common that I think, were potentially confusing for me. And the most common that I see come up in errors in programs in which people think that these are going to evaluate to a falsy value, but they're actually truthy. So these truthy values that are kind of tricky is an empty array. That is actually a truthy value. So in JavaScript, you can convert something to a Boolean by passing it into the overall Boolean function. So this is a Boolean function that JavaScript gives you for free in the JavaScript environment that you can just run automatically. And I don't need to create this anywhere in my program. And I can pass a value into it and it automatically converts it to a Boolean. And when I do this in my program here and I run it, you're going to see that an empty array actually evaluates to true. So an empty array is not a falsy value. So in your programs, if you say if some value and then you run some code after that condition, if that value is an empty array, it's going to evaluate to true. And you're going to get the same result if you use an empty object as well. So if I pass in an empty object to the Boolean operator, that's also true. So an empty array and an empty object are both true. And also a string with just a single space in it. So a string with one single space, that is also going to evaluate to true. This string doesn't technically have to have any characters in it. If it just has an empty space, that's going to be a truthy value in JavaScript. And then negative numbers, those are all going to evaluate to true as well, except for -0. So -1, that evaluates to true. So a few tricky values that you might think are falsy but evaluate to true and our truthy values are an empty array, an empty object, a string, that just has an empty space and then negative numbers, all of those are truthy values in JavaScript. Now, why is this useful and where do you see it come up? Well, I kind of mentioned that you do see this come up in if statements and in conditionals. So that is kind of the most common case, is a if statement or a conditional. So I will show you kind of an example of how that works here. So here on line 28, I have an if statement. And then on line 25, I have a constant called variable. And this variable, I assign it to the value of true. And of course, true is going to evaluate to a truthy value. And then I say, if this variable, I want to go into this condition and console log this value is truthy. Because in this if condition, when I put a variable within this if condition, it is only going to run this code if this value here is a truthy value. So if this value is truthy, then go into this condition. And since the variable is assigned to true, you're going to see that I'm going to console log this value is truthy. Now, if I put false in there, you're going to see that I'm going to run my program and I'm not going to get any output. And that is because that is a falsy value. Now, if I do an empty array here, like I talked about earlier, it's a truthy value. So when I run this, I get this value is truthy. And then if I have, say, just the value of 0, well, that value is falsy. So when I run this, I don't have any output here. Now, you can also use a not operator. So what the not operator is going to do is it is going to convert a Boolean value to the opposite Boolean value. So it's going to convert true to false, and it would convert false to true. So if I say not variable, what I'm saying here is if this value is actually falsy, then enter this block. And I could change this because now we're checking if it's falsy. So if not this variable, so if this variable is falsy, then enter this block of code. And then I run this and you can see this value is falsy. But now if I change this to a truthy value, so if I change it to a string that has characters in it, I'm not going to get any output because this is a truthy value. And this not operator, it's going to be like, okay, this value is truthy, but since I use the not operator, it's going to convert it to a falsy value. So this condition is not going to be met. And we're not going to enter this block of code. But if this was a falsy value, this not operator will convert it to a truthy value, and then you will enter this block of code. So you'll also see this come up with this not operator, the exclamation point operator. Now you'll also see this in a very similar fashion when using ternary operators. So I have const variable equals true. So the same thing I had earlier, line 36, I assign the variable of text to whatever my ternary operator evaluates to. So I do variable question mark. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, if this condition is true, then return this. Else, colon, return this. So if this is a truthy value, it's going to return this first kind of ternary expression here. Else, it's going to evaluate to this. So since variable is true, I would expect text to be assigned to is truthy. And if I run this here, you see I do indeed get is truthy. And then if I use a falsy value here, like nan, you're going to see I get is falsy. So you'll also see truthy and falsy values when using ternary operators. On a similar note, you'll also see these with the double bar operator, or this is also called the OR operator. So here I have the same thing. I have const variable equals true, and then I'm going to assign the return value of using this OR operator to my variable of text. And what's going on here is it's going to say, okay, if this variable is true, it's just going to return this variable. But if it's not true, it's going to return this variable, no matter what. So it's saying, do this if this is truthy, or just return this. So this is called the OR operator, the double bars. So since this variable is truthy, it's actually just going to return that to text. And you're going to see text is assigned to the value of true because this is truthy, so it just returns that. Now, if I assign this to a falsy value like undefined, you're going to see that it evaluates to hello. Because if this is not truthy, it's just going to return what is after the or operator. And then if I assign it to a string that is indeed truthy, you're going to see it just returns that first value there. So you also see truthy and falsy values with the or operator. And then the last example here, and there's probably more examples, but this is just to kind of go to show that there are, very common use cases that you'll see in your programs in which it uses truthy and falsy values, and these are indeed important to know. So the and operator works very similar to the or operator, except it's going to look at this value, and if this value is true, it's going to return this value. So it's saying if truthy here, return this. But if this is falsy here, it's just going to return this value. So here, since variable is assigned to the value of true, which is a truthy value, we're going to see it return hello. So if I run this, you're going to see I do get hello because this is a truthy value. And if I change this to a falsy value, so let's do -0 here, then you're going to see my text is actually going to be assigned to -0. Because if this is falsy, it just returns that first value. So here I get -0. And then if I say some value and turn it back to a truthy, you're going to see I'm going to get hello again, which I do. So you're also going to see truthy and falsy values come up with the double and operator. And I know like in React code, since you can't have conditionals within JSX, you will see this and operator and this or operator and even ternary operators sometimes within JSX quite often. But if you don't know React and that makes zero sense to you, don't worry about it right now. All right, so a value is falsy if it evaluates to false when coerced to a Boolean, or you use it within a Boolean context. And a value is true if it evaluates to true when coerced to a Boolean. And you know if a value is truthy or falsy by knowing the falsy values, and then you know all other values are truthy. And you can definitely just look these up on the go if needed. But the falsy values are 0, -0, an empty string, null, nan, false, and undefined. And a few tricky values that you might think are falsy, but are actually truthy, are an empty array, an empty object, a string that just has one empty space, and then negative numbers. All those are truthy values. And then you see these truthy and falsy values come up often when you use conditional statements. So if you say if some value is truthy, then perform some code. And you also see them come up in ternary operators, the double bar operator or the or operator, and also the double ampersand operator. So hopefully that gives you a good understanding of truthy and falsy values in JavaScript and where they're kind of used, and I will see you in that next one.